Welcome back to the Xennial Rewind. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the music industry and everything that's involved with it. Kind of the artist, what's going on in the music industry, the money that's being made, the money that's being lost, the kind of music that's being produced today, all that kind of stuff. So, everything that relates around the pop culture of music. And as always, we have our hosts today, Moby and Leland. And as you guys know, these are the guys from the T-Hud Popcast. So go ahead and check them out as well. We'll go ahead and post links up above and down below. And let's go ahead and get started, guys.
All right, I'm Moby, and elephant in the room to start. I am just getting over some sort of sickness here, so I know my voice is a little off, but as they say, the show must go on. So it's time for Moby's monologue, and today I don't really have anything spicy for you, but I want to try to paint a picture, especially for our younger viewers, perhaps of the Generation Z or Gen Alpha generations there, who may not have understood the changes in music ownership or lack thereof recently that has occurred over about the past 30 years. So some of my first memories of music actually are that I had this old audio set in my bedroom growing up. I'm talking when I was about 5 years old. I first remember my parents giving me this thing. And it was a radio, but it also had a dual cassette combination there. So what I would do for my first musical cassettes, and I know I'm dating myself here, but that's the whole point, was I would just turn the radio to whatever rock and roll stations I like locally. There was 2 or 3 of them. And I would just wait for a song that I liked to come on. And it was as simple as having a blank cassette tape in the deck. I press record, I get the song, I press stop, I wait for the next song I want, and I created mixtapes. And if you're familiar with the awesome mix tapes that were released as a promotional item after the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, it really wasn't that much different what I was doing there. So a few years later, CDs start to really crest in the mid to late 90s, where they're very affordable and they're absolutely everywhere. So I started to buy some CDs. But, I didn't have a lot of money. I was a kid, so I did what most kids of my generation did. We started to take advantage of, those MP3s, that old file format. Sorry, took me a second. And I started to burn CDs. And I still have a lot of these CDs to this day. And that was just the thing. You would download these MP3 files and you just burn a mixtape, essentially, on a compact disc. But then things started to change around 2001 because it was fall of 2001 where you get the release of the first iPod. And suddenly music is not just a digital file that you're burning onto physical media, but it's actually just a digital file. And you're buying it or pirating it and putting it on this little iPod thingy. But that was the first time that was really jarring to me because I kind of felt like, do I even own this music anymore? All it is a digital file being downloaded, being transferred to this digital device, but there's nothing physical. There's nothing really tactile about it. And as time went on, the iPods slowly started to die out because you started to get music on your phones, and your phones became a better, more economical device because you already needed a cell phone. Now with your smartphone, you could deliver music just the same through those. And then you started to get services like Spotify, which launched in 2008. So now your music's not only digital, but it's just streaming based. So you really don't own anything. And I'll be honest with you, I hated that. I don't use Spotify. You can call me a dinosaur. Whatever music I listen to, I still want to buy, whether it's on a physical format or at the very least, buy the audio file. I can't really burn CDs anymore because modern computers really don't come with disk drives anymore. But I do lament the changes that have happened. I really miss having all my music actually being burned or recorded onto physical media. I treasure the burned CDs that are now like 20 years old that I still have. And with my final point, I do want to give a kudos to music producers out there and artists who insist on releasing physically. That could be vinyl, that could be cassette nowadays. I'm sure CDs are out there, if not going to make a comeback. And I just want to implore those people. I doubt they're watching the show, but if any of you are, please keep up the physical releases. Don't let physical music and media die. That's my monologue.
I think we're gonna have to rename your segment to Moby's Lament rather than Moby's monologue, because that does seem like what you do. It's like the lamentations of the Moby. That's the what is best in life is the lamentations of the Moby.
That
but I completely
well be correct.
I completely agree with you, obviously, because yeah, I mean you're literally just stating true things. Like you said before we started recording that it is going to be very difficult to disagree with your monologue here, but because yes, it is just basically full of facts and how media is presented and consumed and purchased, etc. And I don't know that I lament very much. I mean, I certainly am a Spotify user when the mood arises, but honestly, I would say that of media in general, I think music definitely played the smallest part of my life growing up, for sure. Like it meant the least to me when you pile it into the categories of consuming media, of video games and movies and TV, etc. So I'm not like a huge mega music buff, so I don't quite share. Maybe it's that touch of nostalgia is most of what we talk about on the show kind of impacts us for sure. But I definitely agree, though. Everything you said is certainly true.
Yeah, and I can kind of agree with Moby as well. I mean, things definitely have changed, and I can take it back to the days where when I was a kid, like he was talking about, when you got the dual decks and you're recording, trying to get the things off the radio. I definitely remember that. That was a big thing in like the '80s for me. Was just recording stuff off the radio. I mean, you'd sit there and wait for your favorite song to come up, and then, oh, there it was. And then, of course, like the DJ at the end of the song would come in, like, this is 93.5. And it's like, oh, damn, that kind of thing. But it's like, that's how it kind of started for me. But I can actually take it back further. So I remember, because I'm a kid of the '70s, so I remember 8 tracks and vinyl a lot as well. My dad loved 8 tracks. I don't know why, because 8 tracks suck. The sound quality sucks. You can't really rewind them. You just flip between the 4 different tracks that there are, and you might get the song that you want to listen to. But he loved those things. And so that kind of faded off into oblivion after the '70s. And then by the '80s, LPs, I mean, records were really big, cassettes were really big, but my family was really into collecting records. And what really started the music thing with me, I mean, because like my parents, unlike most Gen Xers, my parents are not boomers. They're actually from the silent generation. So they grew up in like the '50s. So a lot of the early rock and roll stuff, like, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, all those kind of people like that are the folks that I listened to growing up. So a lot of what my parents would consider the hippie music, like the Grateful Dead, even the Beatles, they consider hippie music. I didn't really grow up with. And so by the time the late 1970s, early '80s came around, we had just moved into a new house. My dad got a new hi-fi record set up and all this kind of stuff. I remember him bringing 2 specific records home with him. One was Blondie, Heart of Glass, which was kind of a disco record, but on the flip side, it had Rapture on there. So Blondie was actually the first white rapper, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that. And then the second record he brought was the Sugar Hill Gang, with the hip hop, hibbity hibbity hip hop. You guys remember that song. And those 2 songs right there flipped it over for me, because instead of listening to like the old school 1950s rock and roll music, I kind of got into more of the disco and more into, and rap kind of came from disco. So the rap and the disco genre kind of enveloped me at that point. Now, sure, I still listened to the pop music in the 80s, like Michael Jackson and all that, Madonna and all that kind of stuff. But rap music really started to take a hold of me. And through the 90s, and really through the 90s, that's all I listened to was rap and R&B. And up until 2000, right around 2000 is when I started listening to rock and more of like country and stuff like that. And man, everything just started swinging. And this was right during the time, like what Moby said, when physical media was starting to go away and you could, just get stuff from like Napster, stuff like that and download it, burn your own CDs. But the funny thing is I remember the first burn CD I got was like in 1996 or 7. I was working at HP at the time. My friend was in the Navy and he came home on leave and he was playing this CD in his car and it had all these different songs on it. And I'm like, what the hell is this, man? And I popped it out and I looked at it and it was a CDR. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, in the Navy, we have these CD burners where we can take MP3s and just burn the music. And I'm like, really? I'm like, that's cool. And so, of course, I got home and started looking it up. And the technology for the consumers was just way, way expensive still. But yeah, the technology was there. And it wasn't until like, the late 90s, early 2000s is when people started doing that. And then eventually all that started dying. And then the streaming services came along. And I'm guilty of it. I'm not gonna lie. I listen to YouTube music all the time, all the time. That's the one I go to because I can just type in a song and be like, oh, there it is. Or I can, make a playlist of different songs, and people come over. I can just play that playlist. It just makes it so much easier and so much convenient than breaking out, all my physical copies and then having to try to make a mixtape nowadays with the equipment that I have, that kind of stuff. Or, you could go to your computer and make a whole bunch of MP3s and make a playlist that way and do it that way. But it's just so much easier now to just go to a streaming service and say, oh, okay, this is my party playlist. There you go. Let's go ahead and play that while people are over. So I can kind of see why people have done that. But yeah, I totally agree with Moby as well on this one.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It'll be interesting to deep dive into some specifics here to do with music, but I appreciate both of your thoughts. As like Leland said, I lament the loss of physical media over the decades, but not all hope is lost, as I said, and we'll see where music on physical releases goes in the next decade.
I can honestly say I haven't bought a CD, a physical CD, since 2001. The last one I bought was Stained. I can't remember what album it was, but that's the last CD I bought. Since then, I just either been burning them or within the last 10 years just doing streaming services. So definitely kind of weird how that's happened. And that's another thing that I want to kind of touch on in this episode is how that has kind of hurt the artist as well, but it's also helped them out too. So how that kind of reflects, guys. So what ends up happening is that if people don't know, the artist makes only about 10% of the profits or the revenue off of a song, while the publishing company and all the other people involved with it make the other 90% of the profit. So a lot of artists have started going over, including like the person I have on my on my shirt here, Snoop Dogg, have gone on and just started publishing or buying the rights to their own music. As bad as that sounds, they have to buy the rights to their own music. And some people like Snoop has gone so far as just buying their entire old record company. So, he bought Death Row Records, so now he owns everything, all the masters, everything. So it's really cool that he's done that. And other artists like Taylor Swift, she's done the same thing. And it's kind of cool to see that they're actually taking music back from the big companies. Now, honestly, they're making money off of it now too, but I feel that's a lot more rightful for the artist to make a lot more share of the profit than it is just the person that's distributing their music. You know what I mean? What's your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I guess, I do want the artist to be paid fairly, and that is something that I was hoping was going to be brought up today. Yeah, I've always found it weird how little agency, how little control artists end up having over their music under the traditional system. You basically sign with a label who, yeah, they take a lot off your plate and work to promote you, but I mean, they really take their pound of flesh there, if not more so. So, unfortunately, not everyone has the resources that Snoop does to put in the money and the effort to buy back their catalog, if not their whole label. But I mean, honestly, more power to him. And you just hope for younger artists, new artists who don't have those resources that somehow they're going to find a happier medium of being fairly compensated for their work, while at the same time, do understand that the label needs to make a profit and is a business at the same time and has lots of expenses in promoting you. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any industry, it's like its own little ecosystem, and the labels need to exist. Like they are a necessity, like you say, Moby, for smaller artists trying to get signed and get their break or whatever. Maybe that's not so much the case anymore, as opposed to this time that we're all reminiscing about when we could buy physical media again, with avenues like Spotify or every artist under the sun had a SoundCloud account there for a while, right? It would push their own SoundCloud account, and so like maybe we're seeing, like, maybe we're in that period of the in between, the other option. And I mean, it's a whole nother conversation, maybe part of this one, about how an artist gets compensated via Spotify and how much how much they can actually earn on Spotify. And obviously, like, it's going to be what, I don't even know how Spotify works exactly, per listens, or do they sign a contract with Spotify to get us X amount of payout, and Spotify is like, taking the risk or whatever that they've metered out. I don't know exactly how it works with Spotify, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was different on an individual artist basis, to some degree at least. But maybe this lack of physical media is the part of that transition for artists that are just starting out to be able to earn more than they would otherwise, I guess. Maybe get away from more predatory practices, I suppose, of the industry. But and that's not me saying that Spotify and the way they operate isn't also predatory, because again, I don't fully know how it works. But so it might just be the lesser of two evils at this point, and still something needs to be done. I mean, how come none of these independent artists that have gone independent? I thought Taylor Swift was creating her own label to basically serve as this in between, or somebody was. I thought surely someone has the resources to create a label that is pro artist at the forefront of their operations. And yes, Moby, of course they do have operating costs, and they need to cover those costs, and they do need to generate a profit to. But maybe under something that's self-sustaining, it doesn't. Maybe somebody could create a label that doesn't need to generate a profit.
Yeah, like a non-profit record label,
Right? Or so, yeah.
Like PBS for non-profit music. There you go. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to change in the industry. Now, there was an article that I just read the other day about Snoop, of all people, again, and Spotify. So I think they said out of like I can't remember how many million streams it was of his music, but it's like 2 or 3 million streams. He only made $40,000 off of the whole thing, while Spotify made, I don't know how much more money off of it.
Right.
And so Snoop was kind of raising his voice about that and going, well, what the hell? He's like, so I think he took all his stuff off of Spotify now and he put it on some other thing that he's starting to create. So maybe that's what you heard about, Leland. I'm not sure. Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the whole thing with these streaming services as well. So, I mean, there's so many different streaming services out there that are greedy, and it's not just the music industry, it's all media. So you got the music, you got the movies, you have the TV shows, all that kind of stuff. So you have all these different streaming services out of there as, kind of cutting into all these different people's profits, and these big music industries, they're making money off of it too, because obviously they got to get paid when Spotify is playing some kind of music, and that trickles down to the artist and all those kind of people. But what kills me about streaming services is the fact that they try to copyright stuff. So, like, say, as me as being a YouTuber, right, and I try to play a song. So, say if I were to go out and buy the rights to a song. Now, this has happened to me before, and a lot of YouTubers will probably know what I'm talking about. So, you'll go to like a certain website, you'll buy the rights to one song that's made by an artist, okay, from that actual website or whatever that company is. I'm not naming none right now, but but it's one of those things where, okay, you buy it from here and then you put it on your music, or you put it on your YouTube, and you're playing it, and then like a week later you get a copyright thing. But it's not from the same people that you bought it from, but it's from a different publisher or a different website saying, "Hey, I own the rights to this music." And now we're going to take 100% of your profit of your, even though you played like 5 seconds of the song or something, they want to take the 100% of the profit off of your video because of that 5 seconds. And that drives me nuts. And one thing that really drives me nuts is Nintendo. And I know, Moby, you love Nintendo. You're a Nintendo
with
fanboy.
Nintendo. Boo.
Oh God, I hate that company. I mean, it was great up until Yamamuchi. He was president up until what, 2001, 2002, and after that, the company is just went total all for profit. That's all we're about. And now they started, I think it was back in October 2004, they started Nintendo Music, or Nintendo Music Streaming, or something like that. And what it is a service that plays the music from all the old video games like Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Country, Tetris, all these kind of old songs that you can stream on like your Switch or whatever, and it's a monthly paid service. But my thing is, what it's doing now to YouTubers is, now when you're playing one of these old games, guess what? You start getting these copyright things. And they want to take 100% of your profit because you're using the music that's in the game from 30 years ago that now Nintendo wants to make money off of, that they didn't even have rights to because it was the actual people from the other publishing company that made these songs. But now they're making the money. It just, it drives me nuts, guys. But a couple YouTubers that I know have already got kind of struck by one of these copyright things. Obviously, I don't do much Nintendo stuff, so I haven't. Kind of the same thing happened to me with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. There's some orchestra that ended up doing the Sonic the Hedgehog Green Hill song. And anytime you put Sonic the Hedgehog on and you're playing it, and it's got the Green Hill Zone, that first level, and it's playing that music, they want to get you for that. And every time that I've done it, I've fought them and I've won for fair use. But at the same time, you've got to wait a month. And for that month, you're not making any kind of profit off that video.
I mean, YouTube specifically is like the Wild West. You know what I mean? Like, and it's funny though, because like the strikes and the claims and all the copyright stuff, like, it needs to exist for people to get paid. But it's just the flip side of it is it will prevent other people that aren't stealing that. I mean, it's performative work. It's technically under their fair use, right, terms of service, etc. for the platform itself. It's just, you just get sometimes you get caught and turned in the machine. And also when you're listening, I mean, on YouTube Music, is YouTube Music similar to like Spotify? So when you look up a song on Spotify, like, that it's the artist's song, but on YouTube, if you pull something up on YouTube, it could be some random person uploading a song or a track or whatever. So you don't know who you're clicking and subscribing to. Unlike with this channel, if you click and subscribe to the Xennial Rewind, it's us. So you may as well just go ahead and do it because we're authentic and we're not just uploading random stuff that's an offshoot. But how do you know on YouTube? Like, YouTube, again, it's just like this. The platform itself, I don't know, man. YouTube just boggles my mind how it continues to operate, and really only continues to operate because there's no other direct competition for it. Honestly, like, that's bottom line. If there is any semblance of any iota of a competition, with even half the backing behind it, like YouTube would be done, right? There would have to be huge YouTube reforms if this competitor was able to do things properly or more fairly. What, you know, again, maybe that's deterministic too from an individual, but yeah, I don't know. Like, what the fuck do you do? Because if they got rid of that entirely, then these channels that are already uploading, you know, other people's work for their own clicks that isn't playing the game or, you know, discussing the material or the fair, you know, whatever it falls under fair use, when they, you know, without those roadblocks, then it's like, then it really is the Wild West. There's nobody is the sheriff in this town. But sometimes the sheriff is a little heavy-handed, apparently, on YouTube for sure, right?
Yeah, it can get kind of rough when you're dealing with music on YouTube. It can. And that's why I have specific people that I go to do my music now. I just gave up on the whole, let's buy a license to do this and let's go with this company to do this, because it always ends up screwing you up in the end. So I just ended up going with my own people that I know that make music, and it just makes it so much more simple. They give me the permission. I put the permission right down there in the description, along with their links to the music and all that kind of stuff. Never had a problem ever since. But that makes you wonder too, because say, for instance, if this person, one of these people, ever go to one of these bigger websites to start getting their music on it, years down the road, then what is YouTube going to do? Start flagging all my videos up to that point? I mean, that's kind of sad. Then I lose all the revenue for those videos. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the future, man. It's just kind of crazy the way the whole industry actually works.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, it's good that you know, these individual artists are able to have this extra clientele kind of generated from, you know, the woes of dealing with these platforms. I suppose that is a good side of it, right? For especially for those individual artists. But yeah, if they go in and they sell some of their self-composed tracks years later to, you know, an outlet that you described, like you would subscribe to and license, that exact thing happened to my other D&D show, the Incursible Party, our theme music. I mean, we've had that theme music for like 6 years, and then I get like a Discord message from one of our listeners, and like, "Hey, I saw your music was used in this other person's YouTube video. Like, you should maybe want to look into this." And it just turned out that that's exactly what happened. This music that like we paid this artist for, they had then eventually sold it, and it was like a wishy-washy like transaction. So it's not like we paid for the license of the song, but we basically paid them to be able to use the song. So it's like, it wasn't technically our song, right? So there's nothing that this artist did that was like scummy or anything, but it was just like, we didn't do our own due diligence as we were first launching our show, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not stopping us from using that song anymore, because now it's up on I think it got put to like basically this free use site. So now this company that purchased the rights to the song essentially allows, here's our catalog, you can use this copyright free stuff or whatever it is. So it certainly doesn't impact us that way, but it is a very similar situation. So thankfully it didn't completely bite us in the ass. And you know what, if it gets that theme music, I think it's a very to me it's iconic for the show. Obviously I just love it. I hum it to myself all the time. Maybe it's not such a bad thing having that out in other places, and then they hear it like, oh, this association with things that I already like. Oh, here's another thing that I might like that uses the same song. Who knows? I don't know.
And you know, like I said, with the whole music thing is just kind of crazy, and that's going to kind of bring me to the second segment of the show here. What I want to do is kind of bring up the music, and I kind of talked about it a little bit, and so did Moby a little bit, but the music that you grew up with, what really influenced you as far as what you did in your life? So with you guys, how did it, what music kind of, you know, did you grow up with and kind of influenced you and what you ended up doing?
My first memories of music are my dad was a salesperson at the time, and he had to drive all over. In Canada, we call it a province. In the US, you call it a state. We had to drive all over the province of British Columbia, and he would sometimes take me out of school to go on, you know, a 4 or 5 business day trip with him, and we'd be listening to a lot of music in the car. And that's where he introduced me to the band U2, which to this day is my favorite band of all time. It's also where he introduced me to Tragically Hip, which our American viewers probably have never heard of that band, but Tragically Hip in Canada is like as much part of our culture as maple syrup and hockey. It's this one rock band that is so overwhelmingly important to our culture that they're my second favorite band. Unfortunately, the lead singer Gord Downey passed away of brain cancer a number of years ago, but I was able to see them live once in Vancouver before he got sick, which was amazing. I've seen U2 like 4 times in concert, but that's where my memories start, was cassettes. And not to give too much of a sob story, but I've always had problems with my feet since I was a little kid and then into being an adult. But as a little kid, I had flat feet, so I needed orthotics. And they were very painful. And it was kind of like Invisalign for your teeth, where I would get these plastic orthotics, and then every year I need like a new set to further shape my feet. And I tell you, the first few weeks that I had to put those new orthotics on were extremely painful. The most painful thing I could remember as a kid. And there was a lot of anxiety when my dad had to take me to the foot doctor, the podiatrist's office, to get the new orthotics. And one way he calmed me down was by playing my favorite U2 tapes, which I believe was the album Zoo Station. In fact, I'm certain of that. And so I have a lot of, I guess I would call it mixed memories. Like, I really enjoyed the music, but it also signaled that I was going to get these painful orthotics. I do have a funny story, and I'm going to send a meme for you to post here as I talk about this, RGX. I came across a meme about Savage Garden. I think it was their first CD, the orange CD. And it's like everybody had this as a kid. And that was my brother's first CD. And we would play that thing on loop as we played Nintendo 64. Particularly, I have memories of Mario Kart and Savage Garden over and over and over. So I really remember that. And for my first CD, it's kind of funny. I was put on a spot by my dad. I don't know why he did this. I think it was because my parents were getting divorced at the time and he's trying to impress us. But my dad takes us to a music store. He's like, you all will pick a CD. I'm like, nah, I'm good. He's like, no, every one of you kids picks a CD. So I don't know what else to pick. I hate to say this, but I picked Backstreet Boys just because it was sitting right there. And I'm like, even I think now, I'm like, oh, geez, I picked this boy band as my first ever CD. I won't live this down. But at least it was up from there, because my next CD I actually wanted was Smash Mouth. I think the album, I'm pretty sure, was called All Stars. Probably their most famous album. And then my favorite CD of all time that I ever bought was the Matrix Reloaded deluxe soundtrack. Oh man, all that techno, that song Zion by the band Fluke. Oh, that was so great. I still listen to that shit today. So final memory I want to bring up when it comes to music on my end was I have lots of good memories. Also, they were drunken memories, playing Rock Band and Guitar Hero with Leland. I tell you, Leland may not be Mr. Music as he's identifying, but that man could rip the guitar in Guitar Hero. And the more alcohol you put in him, the higher difficulty he wanted to try to rip. So, Leland, over to you. Those are my memories in one giant shot.
I did not know that that's where your love of U2 came from. So that's actually really nice to hear, especially knowing your relationship with your father. But I'd say, yeah, I mean, music wasn't huge in my life, but definitely some standouts. I think the first cassette that I ever owned was Offspring, Americana. And I just remember playing Pretty Fly for a White Guy in my dad's old station wagon, which had like a rumble seat, right? The rumble seat that face out the back of the and my brother and I loved sitting in that rumble seat no matter where we went, blasting Pretty Fly for a White Guy. We thought it was the fucking hottest shit. And and man, I don't know how old I would have been. Pre-high school, maybe. But I used to love Kid Rock as a young child that should not have been listening to the material that was in Kid Rock songs. And I had my little Discman with I don't even know what Kid Rock album it was. But like my parents were huge softball players. So I was always out at the ball diamond as a kid. Basically grew up at a ball diamond. And I just remember, sitting listening to Kid Rock talk about smashing hose in the face on his couch as I'm sitting there watching these old 40-year-olds play in a big softball around. And yeah, I think I showed off to our old co-host Ghost Marty one time as a kid. I went out onto our second story roof with a music blaster and it just started cranking up Kid Rock and dancing on the roof as a stupid child in this little like townhouse complex filled with young children, like just absolute idiocy. But then after that, moving into CDs, what was huge for me that kind of kept me loosely connected to music in general was like the Big Shiny Tunes compilation discs. Those, I love those because I don't even know if I don't know what time of year they were released or how often they were released, but I would routinely get like the next Big Shiny Tunes as like part of my Easter package from like my grandparents or my parents or whatever. So like with my chocolate, and then I pop in the CD and hear all these. I mean, a lot, some of them were one-hit wonders, but not all of them. And that's kind of how I stayed connected. And nowadays, moving into like my adult years, the kind of music got replaced by podcasts is like my main consumption. Like loading up my iPod instead of music is mostly podcasts, especially back in my old job managing a warehouse. Basically buds in 8 hours a day, listen to podcasts, basically doing my thing. And now though music plays more into my creative process, I'll put on some type of playlist on Spotify. Usually it's like I really love the cello. I fucking love the cello. So I love cello covers. Like the two cello guys, like oh man, love that shit so much. So that's what I'll do. I'll just load up a cello cover playlist of whatever new pop songs there are, and I've certainly recognized them, but couldn't name them most of them. And then that's what I'll do, and that's part of my creative process while I'm like prepping for podcasts for this show, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of like my new flow and how music plays into my life currently.
My history with music kind of goes like this. So the first physical thing that I ever got was actually a 45 record, The Dukes of Hazzard by Waylon Jennings, the Good Old Boys. That was the very first piece of music that I ever owned. And I remember I had been saving up, I don't know what it was, like $4 or $5 or something. And there was this music store called Independent Records that used to sell records and all this. They just recently went out of business. But went there. I was so happy because I went and bought my first record, and I was probably, God, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 5, 6 years old or something. And I went and played it. And I still have that record down here. I have like all my old records. I still have that record to this day, and it still plays. It's a little scratchy from when I was a kid, but it still plays. But that is the first record that I ever owned. And we kind of fast forward. The first cassette that I ever owned was actually the Jackson 5. Well, I can't remember what the hell the name of the album was, but it was the Jackson 5 album. It was when they reunited in the 80s. So Michael Jackson had already became really famous and did the Thriller album and all that. But one of the songs on there was called Torture. And I remember that song. It's like, it's torture. Really cool kind of song, man. And that was the first cassette that I owned. And after that, I just bought cassette after cassette after cassette because that was the new thing. Well, not really new, but for me as a kid, that was the new thing, And right around that time is when CDs started coming out. And my parents bought their first stereo with a CD player in it. And I remember just sitting there watching the CD go in and just watching the little counter count by and everything. And I was like, wow, this is the future. I'm like, listen, you can't hear no static. it's just pure music, you know. It's like, wow, that's amazing. But the first CD that I owned, and I didn't even have a CD player. I'd have to go use my mom and dad's stereo, and that was that was a pain back then because my dad was all into music. He would play music all the time. But I had a Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five was my first CD I ever owned, and they had this one song on there that it was called "I Smell Your Underarms." It was the funniest fucking song ever, y'all. Just talking about, he's like, yeah, I'm going out on a date with this chick, and da 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 da, and then she turns around and says, "Ooh, I smell your underarm." I mean, that's back when hip hop was hip hop, guys. It's not like by the time the '90s came, everybody's like, "I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna do you." But back in
Yeah.
the '80s, it's like, "I'm gonna smell your underarm." It's just amazing how it changed. But and then that was like the first CD I had. The first MP3 I bought was, oh God, I don't even think that music service is around anymore. I can't even remember what the hell it was called. It was like Music Plus or something like that. And it was just like this thing that I bought a Dell PC, and the subscription came like for a year with the Dell PC. And yeah, that's the first time I bought an MP3. But I mean, and that's kind of just how my music had went, guys, as far as the things that I bought. Now, as far as the genres of music had changed, like I said, I went from, listening like 50s and country music. So it went from like Elvis and Chuck Berry and frickin' Jerry Lee Lewis and, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the outlaw music that I listened to when I was young, just because my parents and the people that was around my parents. I don't know if you knew that whole country outlaw thing. It was kind of like how rap went that way in the '90s. That's how country went in the '70s. But and then by the '80s, I was listening to, like I said, a lot of rap and hip hop, but I still listened to a ton of pop music back then. So the whole new wave music, Phil Collins, just all the great music that came out in the '80s. And then by the '90s, it was purely just rap and R&B. By the 2000s, it was rock and that kind of stuff. And as I gotten older, guys, I've really reverted back to just listening to all the old school stuff, all the the '80s stuff that I listened to back in the day. I mean, that's really what I listen to now, especially when I'm playing all these old retro games back here. I just pump in some old '80s or '90s music depending on what I'm playing. So if I'm playing like an '80s system, I'm listening to '80s music. I'm like playing something from the '90s, I'm listening to something from the '90s. So kind of cool, but that's really what I listen to. All the new music, I don't really listen to. I mean, there's a few people I like Bruno Mars is okay, The Weeknd. But if you listen to their music, it really kind of sounds retro, kind of like it's from the '80s. So I don't know. It's just kind of crazy how it's gone. I just wanted to thank everybody once again for coming and watching us and all that great stuff. And I wanted to thank Leland and Moby again for coming on to the podcast. And definitely check out their podcast, the T-Hud Popcast. We're going to go ahead and post a link up wherever up here and down there as well. And also check me out, Retrogamer Gen X, on my YouTube channel, Retrogamer Gen X's Retro Gaming and Computing channel.
Hey, if you like what we're doing, click the subscribe button, click the thumbs up, leave a comment, do all the things you're supposed to do.